it's me, Jay, your GM. I use he, him.
Hello, it's me, Air. I use he, him.
And I'm Jerika, playing with her microphone again. She, her. And this is Insight Check, where we delve into the dungeon of your bad decisions to retrieve the treasure of wisdom.
I wasn't sure if you were leaving that for me or if you had forgot it.
It was a Rocky Horror moment where I was leaving the listening audience in suspense for a moment.
Leaving them in anticipation.
Yes, exactly.
When I edit that, it'll be really hard not to cut out the gap like I always do.
And then you'll just have to cut all this. It's just, you're making more work for yourself.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another fine episode this week. We're kicking it old school this week. We're going back to our roots, you know? We've been talking about other RPG systems. We've been talking about our games we've played. We've been talking about, like, you know, all sorts of other stuff, like drama in the TTRPG space and issues that are, like, facing people in the gaming industry. You know what? Let's get back to basics for a week. Let's go all the way back to answering cues directly from our A's.
With our whole A's.
We're using our whole A's this time. We have learned along the way.
Triumvirate of A this session.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going...
Oh, yeah.
Is this the Pope of D&D? Or are we missing someone?
I'm a huge J-hole, and I'm here to make it happen.
I guess I'm the Holy Spirit? I don't know. I think the Trinity... And
I'm Jerika. I use she, her.
God, that was extremely good, Drake.
Well,
sometimes I'm a good podcaster.
I only wish that I hadn't been somewhat distracted turning off my fan so that I could have given you the big laugh reaction you deserved. You earned it, and I denied you it, and I'm gonna live with that.
I heard the laugh anyway. I'm
glad.
chuffed.
Okay, everybody, we're answering cues this week. Do we want to go real old school and even do like a dungeon crawl?
Whoa. Does anyone have anything for a dungeon crawl?
My dungeon crawl is Horizon Zero Dawn.
Oh, really? What about it?
3 people who I know and love have played it recently, and I think everyone should play it. So go play Horizon Zero Dawn and get back to us. We'll wait.
Best game of this generation.
Okay, but can you put a bow on this to tie it back into tabletop RPGs?
Good storytelling is compelling.
There you go.
Yeah, nailed it.
World building is important. Unique ideas are also very interesting.
People love unique ideas.
I wanted to talk briefly about Sarah, the dislocating GM, aka at Mustangs Art. They are a DM Guild creative who recently put out a pretty comprehensive rule set around using wheelchairs in D&D and like fantasy wheelchairs. Yeah, and they're very comprehensive rules that go really thoroughly through how to make a wheelchair player not feel disadvantaged in any way and be like a part of the team and have their own, you know, unique abilities that maybe other members of the team don't have that compensate for any sort of differential from player to player. And it's a very thorough, well-made document. It's received, I think, 3 major updates already based on feedback. So they are taking feedback and getting information. Obviously, maybe right now is not the time to be hitting their DMs with feedback. If you are interested in learning more about that, they've also done other sort of accessibility mods before, and they have some upcoming supplemental stuff for, I think, like an artificer that's related to the wheelchair thing that they've launched. And then they're also making a rogue right now, which in all of their content, it has an accessibility tint to it. So I'll be interested to see how it is exactly a rogue subclass has that bent to it, but I look forward to it. They have made a couple of unique options, and they were on top of taking on the sort of task of creating this very comprehensive 18-page PDF with upgrades and like magic item drops and things like that are all suited towards the wheelchair. They also made the entire thing dyslexia friendly. So it's in a font and layout that is friendly to dyslexic readers. So very thoughtfully made document that you can check out.
I know this came up in our Discord, and there were people talking about it, and a lot of people, had mentioned, like, well, but you're living in a world of magic. You can abate any particular, physical condition by way of magic. And we were having that conversation in the Discord about like, I mean, if the player is interested in that, sure. But if you have a player who is very interested in, perhaps they are in a wheelchair. Now, I don't want to speak for anyone who is, but I can certainly see someone for whom, if that is their lived experience, they might want to have that represented in a fantasy world. So it's not so much that, a wizard does it and that is not an issue for anyone anymore. It's that, no, let us start from the presumption of this person wants to see themselves represented in the game and then figure out how it fits into a fantasy context before we're just like, bibbidi bobbidi boo, everything's fixed.
Right. The issue isn't that this methodology is meant to replace any previous methodologies. There's also, I think, in the Eberron book, a bunch of rules about prosthetic limbs that you can get that are like magically enchanted to replace missing limbs. And if that's how you want to approach your character, that's fine too. If you want to have your character have been healed from it, that's fine. And then this is just a third way that you can do that. And for the people who want to do it, that's great. And for people who don't want to, these rules are optional. They're just homebrew that you don't have to implement in your game if you don't want to. So it's just a situation of more options. And that conversation that we had in our Discord has been going on all over the tabletop RPG community as people are sort of seeing things from a new angle. I think traditionally and historically, we have overserved the narrative of like miraculous recovery to the point of kind of almost fetishizing recovery fiction. Whereas, embracing people who maybe don't want to change magically, people who don't want core pieces of their experience and identity to abruptly go away. Embracing those people and making the world comfortable for them is also important. And this is just a step towards that. So really cool document.
There's one thing I've learned about accessibility is exactly that, is about having options that help to serve as many different voices and perspectives and life experiences as there are out there.
Right. Yeah. It's more options. It's never about taking options away, unless those options suck.
But these don't.
Right. All right. Let's get to cues.
Let's get some cues up in here.
We have 3 that are in like a series that are all replies to each other, so I guess we can tackle those in order. If you included it all, how do you typically handle PC death? Any ideas or recommendations for how to handle it with a group who haven't experienced it before? That is from No Tom to Lose. How do you handle PC death? Well, first, I ritually gather the blood. I put that into my altar. I burn that, and I say my prayers to the gods of GMing. And once that's done, from there, it's really just about absorbing the power.
I think the way not to do that is to have the conversation in which you say your PC's dead be the first conversation about it. I think if you are using death as a mechanic in your campaign, which a lot of people choose to do,
sure,
you should make everyone aware of that.
Right, yeah.
Much easier to deal with passing of a beloved character that I've spent hours and hours investing in if I know that it's a possibility and have a backup character prepared.
Well, this ties into another question we've been given from Demo N, who is a new friend in our Discord. Well, not so new now, but has been working with us on game development, has great ideas. What are good things to cover in Session 0? I think the level of lethality in your game and the fact that death is a very possible outcome from a given combat is a great thing to cover in Session 0.
Or that you don't expect to run a deadly campaign, because that's usually a preference that a player has. And if they don't, they'll develop it pretty quickly in response to circumstances. So it could be that someone's looking to, try a bunch of characters on, and they really just want the character weed whacker to come along and mulch their virtual bodies to pieces several times so that they can figure out like which class they like the best, or like which specific warlock they like the best.
There's just so many.
I don't think a character's death is always a big deal.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we can make it into a bigger deal than it is in in the game. Like, I think it's harder to think of a character dying than it is to actually go through a character dying, is basically what I'm trying to get at. Like, there's an initial shock where it's like, oh, that sucks. Oh, that sucks. That character had like a whole arc left to go on and stuff to do and was a very important character for the dynamic of the group. But I think once a character dies and you've had that initial like gut punch of like, oh God, that sucks. It's like, well, then the player starts thinking about, oh, well, now I need a new character. Okay, well, I actually haven't ever played this class before, and that seems kind of interesting. And I haven't, now I know more about the world, so I know of this place and that place that I might be able to tie into to bring my character into the game. And, you know, once you start thinking like that, it's like all the crappiness of character death starts to like go away a little bit, and you get like back into the meat of character creation. And for the other players, it's kind of exciting. Like, you know, how rare is it for anything to shake up the dynamic of an ongoing game? Like, suddenly there's a new character here, and we've all got to adapt to this new character and how they integrate into the party and how their dynamic shifts the entire party around. We didn't have a character death, but we had a character swap character. We had a player swap characters in my Saturday game,
and I was very confused because I thought it was a new character.
Yeah. We had a player swap characters to. We actually had that happen twice, but one was me sort of faking everybody out. But yeah, we had Iblis switch over to Ostis.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, it was pretty early in the campaign, so it wasn't like so far into where it was like impossible to like switch gears easily. And it was at a very natural point in the story too. Like, they had just cleared a dungeon. And so the character was like, well, I cleared this dungeon. My character has already sort of accomplished their goal of like finding a way to make the Dragonborn stronger. They found this awesome hammer with the spirit of an ancient dragon. So yeah, we'll go back there and go back home, and that mission's done. So I'll swap on a new character. Once you get through the like bandage pulling part of it, I feel like it's kind of like TPKs in my opinion, honestly. TPKs suck when they happen, but almost immediately it's like the fun of making a new campaign. It immediately starts washing over you, and it's like, oh, let's do a new campaign now.
So you're a very resilient kind of person.
Yeah.
I know a few people who have a lot of emotional investment in their specific characters, and it would take them a little longer to come to terms with not being able to play a certain character anymore.
Yeah, and it's really situational depending on like how the character dies too. If the character dies in a really shitty way, it can really mess things up.
Oops, I fell in a pit.
Oops, the Remoraz killed me in one hit.
Right. It's like if you die in a fight that was never winnable and you feel like it wasn't earned in any way and it wasn't even dramatic, because it's not like they died in a way that was like heroically saving the others. They just died in round 2 for not any good reason. That can feel kind of crummy.
I want to ask Jerika. I have had the privilege and the honor of being involved in some of your character creations for different systems.
You've been the victim of some of my character creation.
Are you one of those? Because I know that you need to fall in love with them pre-playing them. Do you have that strong emotional investment wherein if they die, it's going to be...
So you might know this about me. Because we've been friends for a while. I have a short attention span.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, and my philosophy towards characters has changed, but I do like trying on various hats.
Yeah.
And character death is a opportunity to try on a new hat.
Absolutely.
Especially if you're playing a very sad crag cat druid wizard that is not fun to play.
And that's, to me, I think that's one of the greatest lessons that you can take away from character death in general, if you can stomach it. I mean, some people, it just, you know, some people are all about a continuous fixed narrative where there's a clear arc from beginning to end. And for them, character death is a abrupt end to an arc that's not satisfying.
Choosing the wrong page in the Choose Your Own Adventure book.
Right. But for people who can stomach it, I think normalizing characters leaving campaigns is actually really healthy for a game. and for a gaming group. I think normalizing the idea of like people come and go in these games. The idea that like you have to start at the beginning of the campaign and end at the end of the campaign with the same character, I think is kind of harmful to overall fun, because sometimes you build a character that's not fun to play. Or sometimes the events of the narrative make your character not fun to play anymore.
Yeah.
And if your character's depressing to play, then please God, don't play it. Like, this is a game that takes 2.5 to 4 hours of your life, weekly, monthly, even so. That's a lot of time to dedicate to a hobby that you don't get 100% return on investment for. Like, if you're not sitting down having fun and ending the game having fun, please God, do something else. It's not worth it.
Indeed.
So that answers the first and second cue. The third cue, another question along the same vein that could always get more thought. If a table chooses to exclude the risk of PC death for whatever reason, what other risks can the GM introduce that pose a sizable threat? That is from Frosty, a player in my Saturday game.
Kidnap
and also a member of the ICT.
the pets and send the party ransom letters. That would devastate me. If anyone ever took my ooh away, I would write a very sad song about it.
Not playing the character, you're playing the player. When we were in our Mutants in the Night game, I had, from a roll, the opportunity to wound Evan's character, but I know Evan's character was in some way a version of himself, because Evan loves to longboard, as did his character in the game, and I lit his longboard on fire. So I knew there would be,
go for the underbelly,
yes,
the soft underbelly.
The soft bits. Step. No. But knowing your players and what they love. Do they love pets? Is there an aspect of their character that is representative of who they are IRL that you can hone in on?
Are they into their hair a lot? And if you chopped it off, would there be a loss of, would there be an enervation happening?
PC death is always personal stakes, so you're looking for other personal stakes to fill in. But
you should also be like careful when you do that kind of thing, because it can feel a little punishing.
You want to make sure.
If you just take everything your players love away from them all the time, that's maybe worse than dying. That's living in hell.
Early ICP.
Yeah, that's some no exit shit right there. That's hell is other people who run games.
Another good opportunity is to escalate the scenario around the players. So, for example, let's say your players are fighting a dragon and the dragon wipes the party. Well, the dragon doesn't necessarily kill this group of players. They went to the mountain to fight the dragon for a reason. So perhaps they were trying to escape from a dangerous location and passed into a dragon's lair. Well, the dragon might grab up their corpses, fly off into the night, and then get attacked by some other dragon, and then drop their corpses, and now they're scattered along a mountain range just in the middle of nowhere, separated, alone, and badly wounded. And so now you can pick up next session, and there's these huge stakes, like the party's been separated, maybe they've lost some magic items, or they don't know where they are, and so you spend a couple sessions figuring out where each other is and getting back together. Like, that's a way to raise stakes without killing your players. If your players are in a war, maybe your players get wiped. That means the faction that the players support loses a battle. That was they weren't there to intervene in.
Worse than death.
What's that?
It's related to what you just said.
Sure.
When you make a dragon angry and it goes and flattens an entire village. That feels really bad.
And then, like, your players maybe have to interact with this town that was destroyed directly because of their... Matt Colville, cha-ching, once wrote a very good quote that I really like. Drama is when a man's heart is at war with itself, or anybody's heart is at war with itself. But the idea is that anytime you can create a conflict inside of a person between what they want and what they have to give up to get it, or the outcome that they desired, but what actually happened, those things are probably more meaningful than the fictional death of a fictional character anyway, because they have to do with like desires, right? Like the gap between wanting something and not getting it can be more difficult to process or more meaningful to process for a character than like simply, oh, my character went on this quest, fought a villain, died fighting them, but the villain died as well. So like it was a heroic sacrifice, like sad that they died, but at least they got to go out nobly. Alternatively, my character went to a villain, lost to that villain, and then that villain did something terrible to the people my character cares about. That's more meaningful to that player than dying heroically fighting against a villain. Like, yeah.
I want to say also, there's if a PC does die, but you don't want PC death to be an issue, they can always come back by some means of Deus Ex Machina, and now the tension is not.
Yeah, and same if a PC's death is unsatisfying.
Yeah, but you can tie that in narratively to like, how did you come back? Why did you come back? Who brought you back? And all of the answers to all of those questions can then start stemming the tension of, maybe you were brought back by some greater being who has a task for you, or has chosen you as a scion of their whatever domain they're in, if it's a god or what have you. But there's always opportunities to make the tension now. You owe someone something.
Yeah, this is where narrative RPGs can actually be good training wheels for learning DM skills, because a lot of narrative RPGs require you to resolve roles as success with a consequence. And thinking of the consequences of a positive event is a skill set that can really help you as a TM. Like, you survived getting killed by the enemy, but there's still a consequence. And being able to come up with that failing forward mindset is really important.
It's a very fine line to walk, because the consequences have to be in scale with with the defeat, or else it just feels like, well, I had no chance to change that situation anyway.
Yeah, if you get a TPK in a clash with a bunch of bandits on the road to a town that had nothing to do with the main plot, it was just like, it's much better to wake up from that tied to a tree with like your horses and bags stolen. That's going to feel a lot more earned than just like, oops, the campaign's over. You found some bandits and rolled a couple bad rounds.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be like, oh, we lost to some bandits and now the king is really mad at us and has expelled us completely from his kingdom.
Right, yeah.
Like, that seems like disproportionate to the failure.
Especially for like a random encounter that wasn't important.
Yeah.
You were robbed? Get out of here.
Absolutely.
What a jerk.
How dare you?
Or even worse, like, you get robbed, you wake up on the side of the road tied to a tree with all your stuff gone, and then immediately get attacked by wolves, and now you don't have any of your equipment, and you're just in this death spiral.
That feels bad.
Where you're constantly getting screwed over for getting screwed over for getting screwed over.
Yeah.
That can, for sure. You don't want a negative consequence spiral. You definitely want to have a situation where, like, you go through a hardship, a bad thing happens, you can then start building back up, peaks and valleys in your narrative as it's rising towards that ultimate climax.
I think complications is a good way to think about it, instead of like consequences. I think complications are a much more interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, there's a lot of times you get the question askers in Reddits and stuff who ask, like, how should I punish my players for this? It's like, never punish your players.
Yeah.
Don't say punish.
Especially your players. Like,
changing your verbiage can be so important when you start thinking about like how to treat people with respect.
Yeah. And actually like have fun playing a game together.
Yeah, exactly.
That you're all voluntarily there to do.
Yeah. For sure. Shall we tackle another one? Air asks, how often does your RP focus on non-class elements of your character?
Your me impression is awful.
Just
Come
pretend
on, you
you're...
Hang on, gotta go through my nose.
Yeah, get that nasal. Yeah.
All right. How often does your RP focus around non-class elements of character, e.g. their
I'm learning I'm a robot.
E.g. their species, ancestry, their profession for adventuring, alignment, etc., playing into story elements related to their class?
Dateline, D&D, 2020. 23 Skidoo.
So yeah, how often does RP focus on stuff that's baked into character creation that's not necessarily your backstory? And I think this came about because you were talking to us during the game design stuff about ancestry and things like that, and you were like, oh, it never really comes up.
I always lean class for all of my like story stuff. The way it came up was actually out of I took a different approach with the PC I'm playing in the Small Folk game run by Drunk Vitologist. Hi, DP. I, instead of having like a very fleshed out backstory, I had just a general, he was part of an order and something went wrong. And then each level up, I'm picking a new class and finding a narrative reason to explain why he is this thing. So initially,
You've made a multi-class monster?
I've made one level of every class so far. So he's currently a ranger, fighter, barbarian, cleric, warlock.
Wow.
You mean
A
the
Drebus. Yes, I'm taking the Drebus approach. But
Except for the air is doing it like the min-maxer way, I'm sure. Like, I'm sure it actually still functions pretty well.
It's a nightmare. It's really bad.
Well, don't worry. After 10 levels, you will have gotten all of them, and then you can start taking some extra levels and things.
Yeah. But what I would do with each level up is he would remember something about his previous life, because up until this point he's been a retired drunkard who's lost much of his memory of what he's done. So most recently I took a level of warlock and took the genie patron, and I just dropped on the party, oh yeah, I have this bottle, and the only thing I remember is I was told not to open it unless I wanted to know why I can't remember anything, and it's starting to feel like I should. And I popped it open, and a very pissed off genie came out and was like, "We had a deal. What the hell are you doing?" And but that was the thing that was decided on the fly. And I was like, "How am I going to work this in narratively?" But I realized every time I did it, it's always class driven for me. I never looked to ancestry or race, species, whatever terminology we want to use, depending on the system.
Ancestry.
Their profession, their alignment. It is always class for me, and I was wondering how much it is class that drives your character's backstory for you.
I would say 7 times out of 10.
7 times out of 10. Okay.
Very likely.
Yeah.
And it's usually got something to do with druids.
Fair.
So I think that ancestry is one of those things that defines your character if you let it. Yes. Like, so like Warforged, for example, is probably going to have a little more in their backstory about why they're a Warforged, because that's a very specific and kind of usually an uncommon thing, right? I had a player who was a cat, an awakened cat. Obviously, that was a huge part of their character arc, why they were an awakened cat, how they ended up awakened, and the fact that cats only live like 14 years, so they wanted to not be a cat anymore because they're already 7 years old when they were awakened, and now it's been 3 years since then, and like, oh, I'm gonna die. They were on this like quest to gain power and find a way to prolong their life and become some other long-lived species.
Which is the roundabout way of saying Will is going to be the first cat to become a lich. Go on.
Well, no, they've become an elf.
Oh yeah, that's step 1 to lichdom.
There you go. I think that class is a very easy one to define your backstory because it is such a prominent part of your character. Your class abilities are the things that are going to be coming up 9 times out of 10. And generally speaking, classes are also sort of like being a cat in that they're very like front facing and demand sort of being addressed. If you're a warlock, for example, there is probably has to be a reason for that. Like, you don't trip and become a warlock on accident, generally speaking.
Didn't I just say that's what I did? But anyway.
So recently, I tried to upplay Callie's ancestry because she's an Aasimar, and there's like this running joke where like she says she's human and then she like does Aasimar things, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, definitely a human." Mostly it's Sialatus.
Yeah, for sure.
But and a lot of like the stuff about her being an Aasimar is her backstory stuff. But I lean much more heavily into her class stuff, and stuff that happens in the game affects her class to the extent that I switched my subclass, my sorcerer subclass, based on what was happening in the game.
Right. Started out wild mage, but you became friends with Uwu, the storm elemental.
We're definitely life partners at this point.
My uwu.
There's two of them. Another one that I tried to kind of break away from class being the penultimate, the ultimate determiner of RP. I've created this really cute Dragonborn. They've classed into Bard, but I wanted to use the dragon breath. Your dragon's breath from the Dragonborn ancestry as a narrative element. And so I took glass blower's tools and the clan crafter background to kind of give the impression that like her family has sort of an innate ability to blow glass because they're red dragonborn. So they always have access to a forge, basically. So I've been trying to play up sort of RP scenarios with glass blowing elements. For example, and it was lucky enough that another player was trained in glass blowing. So we had like this whole discussion about glass blowing. And Palm, my character, created this like little bird out of glass and was like, this is what I can do. And then another character was like, oh, can I turn that into an arrowhead? And I was like, sure. So it kind of worked out. So that's like the most success I've had with like not a class RP lean in.
Yeah, I feel like Matt's pretty good at this too. Matt plays a Dragonborn in my Thursday game, and Matt really put me to task on expanding Dragonborn lore and fleshing that out and helping me make sure that it was like kind of a cohesive structure. And I would say that being a Dragonborn has influenced a lot of, and I think that also that helps is when the world has some meaning to these different ancestries, like when the world treats these people differently, not necessarily in a negative way, but like when there is some difference to being born. For example, in my setting, elves don't have money. They don't use currency at all. There's no currency in elf lands. So if you go to an elfin land, you have to approach problems differently. You can't simply just pay people off or buy things that you need. You trade goods or you offer some service to the community, something like that. And in a similar way, Dragonborn have this military service kind of built into their society because they are sort of the self-appointed defenders of the rest of the world against dragons. So there's this sort of almost like military school upbringing that works its way into the characters who come from there. Iblis in my Saturday game had a similar kind of thing going on in their background. That comes from Matt and me working out Dragonborns a while back. So that also helps. And with Aasimar, you can rely on their connection to a guiding angelic figure to make their being Aasimar matter. To their chagrin.
Yes.
Yeah, I had Ardenast from a previous campaign. Was the Aasimar guardian of a character in the previous Saturday game. And then when Jerika told me that they wanted to be an Aasimar, I was like, would you be open to using this character again? I think people would get a kick out of it. And Jerika was like, well, sure. Not knowing what they had signed up for.
Well, I actually Ardenast is fine.
Yeah, sure.
Like, Jerika is fine with Ardenast.
Yeah.
I just thought it would be a funny thing if, like, the Aasimar and their, like, guardian were kind of antagonistic.
Yeah.
And so, like, and Ardenast is a big personality.
Mm-hmm.
Hallie's also a big personality. Mm-hmm. So I thought maybe, like, there would be a little bit of, like, go away, you're stealing my spotlight.
I love that. I love their dynamic. I think they're so funny.
Ardenast.
Yeah, just immediately tries to get rid of this angel every time they visit. And the angel is just powering through the conversation, like undeterred. And
those are some of my favorite. I mean, I really, really like RP in Saturday game. I think we do really, really well.
Yeah, I think it's a good group.
really like RPing with Ardenast because I can be a total shit. And Ardenast just like ignores it.
And you're not even like wrong to do it either. The other players don't view you as being mean because Ardenast is kind of like just the Kool-Aid man coming through the wall and being like, I'm here now. You have to deal with me.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know what like the previous Asimar's relationship with Ardenast was.
They were just terrified of Ardenast all the time. Okay. Because they were so, that character was such a like timid and meek character. And so Ardenast was just like too much for them to process. And so they were just constantly being cowed by Ardenast in a way that's like completely opposite of how Callie interacts with him.
I love the way you can kind of like, Ardenast is a tool in many ways.
Sure, yeah. It's very loud, very boisterous, and has like an idea about how every conversation should go.
Yeah, and also a tool for you as like a GM.
Yeah, that kind of tool. Okay.
I meant it both ways.
Sure.
And so I think it's interesting to hear that, to kind of see how different players have approached this tool.
Yeah, it's similar to how, like, when I introduced Clarence is another kind of big personality, right?
And I've had successive characters, one that kind of hated Clarence's guts, and the other that kind of loved Clarence.
But Clarence is kind of like a big personality in a game to introduce. Yeah. I would say Clarence is probably the NPC who most runs the risks of being a DMPC for me in the negative way.
I disagree.
Hey, Jay. Hey, Jerika. Do you know why you never assume someone's an Asimar?
Why?
Because it makes an ass out of M&R.
M&R?
Yeah.
M&R.
Oh, boy. That's not NB friendly air. I veto it.
Yes, you know what? It is.
M is technically them,
M and
right?
R.
M could be them.
Yeah,
them and R.
true.
Yeah, I don't know.
Them and R. Yes. I was actually being a pirate.
Yeah, them and R. Let's tackle Eridan's question. Not sure if this particular cue has been asked before, but hey, let's roll. How much of a character's backstory, family life is acceptable to be woven into the game's overall story? To avoid controversy, I'll keep it brief and say that a character I have has a somewhat sprawling family, and via those connections has practically an entire city on lock in the Underdark. So far, things have gotten ludicrous, but the future seems to be pointed to Clown Town once the large story events move forward. In this particular campaign, that isn't a big problem because it's just friends, but for other DMs and parties, is this a recipe for a bad time? So basically, I think this boils down to, like, how much power should you give a character in their backstory?
How much scenery are they allowed to chew? How much scenery should they chew?
So I thought this was an interesting question because I wasn't positive whether he was asking as a player or as a DM. I assume a player.
I would think this is a player, yeah.
So you have no control over how much...
Who lives, who dies, who tells your story.
How much a GM chooses to include, right?
Sure.
The more expansive your backstory, the more let down you might be.
Yeah, right. If you put in a lot of effort into your backstory and you don't see that reflected in the game, it might really lead you to be bummed out. You should definitely tell your DM if that's what you're after. And you should also probably tell other players if that's what you're after. So that way they know, hey, this character's going to need, an arc at least to really focus on them. So just be prepared for that.
And I've in the past, I've used extensive backstories as emotional manipulation. To get my DM to witness me in some fashion, to have some agency and control over some part of the world, whether it's an island in the Moonshades or what have you. So I would also consider whether you're kind of walking this line. That's just, if it's a one town, whatever, that's not too bad. But
unless it's a city campaign and the one town is the town.
That's problematic, right? So I'm the prince of the city and I have control over the exchequer. Do you? I have to say that my sort of philosophy on character creation has evolved, and we've talked about this on the podcast, but I think the most fulfilling backstories are the ones that develop at the table.
Yes.
And Justin McElroy actually talked about this on the recent The Adventure Zone cast they put out this year for Maximum Fun Drive. He talked about character discovery as a mechanic at the table. And this is where you learn about your character's backstory as the game is happening. He cited, I believe this, if I get this wrong, I'm sorry, but I believe, so he was talking about the Firbolg and the Firbolg's new interest in accounting. Mm-hmm. And he drew this connection at the table between certain things that the Firbolg had done in the past, about sort of the supply and demand of necessary supplies like food, mm-hmm. and accounting, the accounting that was being taught in school. And so Justin made this connection to say, oh, the Firbolg would have some sort of interest in this accounting stuff because they already showed leanings in their, in this sort of backstory scenario. And like that was really interesting character discovery, mm-hmm. I think. That's become a big part of the Firbolg's sort of view of the world.
Orion Black, Dungeon Commander on Twitter, has made an article on D&D Beyond about front story, and it's really good to read if you're interested in that kind of character discovery aspect. It's about how your character doesn't need a lot of backstory. They need a lot of front story. They need a front-facing. The coolest stuff in your character's life shouldn't have happened before the game started.
Yes.
That is absolutely true.
Yeah, like the coolest stuff in your character's life should be stuff that's ahead of them. And so, like, giving them a tragic past is useful if it means that they are on a quest, right? But giving them a tragic past by itself isn't interesting. It doesn't make them more compelling, and it doesn't give them a reason to do things. But for me, I call this hooks, giving your character hooks, little things that can latch on to adventures or story hooks, and this is the way to get your DM to engage with your backstory, by the way. If you want your DM to read your 7-page novel, then what you need to do is you need to put hooks in that novel that the DM can salivate over, yummy, I want this. My character's parents were killed, and I was forced to live in the woods for 12 years where I learned druidcraft. Okay, interesting, but not useful. Or my character's parents were killed by a man in a black robe who had strangely long fingers, and I am hunting that man, and I have spent 7 years living in the woods on my own, gaining the power I need to fight back when I find him. Now that's a hook, because now as a DM, I'm thinking, like, where do I put this long-fingered man into my game? Like, I gotta figure out a place for a long-fingered guy, and what's his deal? And also, why did he kill these random people in the woods? And, like, that's suddenly getting my DM gears going. Yeah.
They made fun of his long fingers, so...
Yeah, okay, cool.
Long finger.
I was thinking actually about Inigo Montoya's 6-fingered man when I thought of the long fingers. Anyway.
As you might do. And there's also opportunities in the game to, once you identify those hooks as a player, mm-hmm. to sort of use the tools you're being given to flesh out your backstory as well. So mm-hmm. Jerika's backstory is a whole thing. She was originally from the desert, and her family was, her whole tribe was wiped out by a necromancer. And she spent years in the desert living off their corpses as a vulture. It's a little grim. Mm-hmm. But she was very much on the hunt for this necromancer.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a cool thing, because then your DM gets to incorporate a necromancer, and you can even incorporate it in unexpected ways.
All right. So when there's a worm speaker who is either a half dragon or a dragonborn, she showed up, and I was like, there she is. That's the necromancer that killed my family.
So you decided that, not the DM?
I did.
Wow, interesting.
I was getting signals that, like,
power move.
The DM was gonna follow Tyranny of Dragons, and we weren't gonna, like, do backstory stuff. So I was just gonna, like, find the necromancer.
So you tied yourself into the game, yeah. Here's the thing with that. I would be okay with you doing that to me. I would not be okay with a first-time player that I'd never played with before doing that to me. I would feel so, like, put upon.
It can go very wrong. Yeah. I mean, it helped that, like, we, like, killed her in the encounter or whatever.
Oh, wow. You killed her right away? Oh, my goodness.
Something like, I can't remember exactly. This is a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure, like, she was out of the picture, so it didn't really matter.
Sure.
But, this is the thing. She had a sword. She had a Hazaron. Mm-hmm. Which was cursed, and so it had a bad entity inside that tried to make our wizard do bad things. And Jerika would always be very, very opposed to whatever the sword wanted because of the association with the necromancer. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, that you created a little bit of inter-party conflict, but it's like,
delicious.
The sword is evil. Like... Why do you have a problem with me opposing evil things?
I like a good inter-party conflict. I think it's important to always remember that, like, players aren't characters. So, like, two characters can disagree. It doesn't mean that the players are having an argument. And that requires a certain level of maturity. And if your group doesn't have that level of maturity, then you shouldn't introduce inter-player conflict because it can feel like a fight sometimes.
It's important to check in if you're going to do that with the player. I'm playing in that small folk game with Matthew, and his character is a very young upstart bard who had the night prior gone into the rooms we had sealed off and said, don't go in these rooms, they're full of bad stuff. But he went in those rooms.
I remember this.
So I put him in a box. I put him on timeout. But before I did that to his character, and obviously roles were involved to see if it was possible, I checked with Matt and said, Matt, I'm about to do something that might take away your character's agency for an evening.
Sure.
Insofar as we can find in a space. Is that okay? And went from there. So yes, always make sure you're checking in with the player before the characters do stuff.
Sure. But I do like inter-character conflict, although sometimes, it depends on the players.
You have to have a mature party of players.
And it's not always maturity. It can also just be like a level of familiarity. Like, you know, it can be harder to have an argument that doesn't feel personal with a person you don't know very well.
Yes.
I agree. Wholeheartedly.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's sort of like
strange irony in that the people you know and love the most are the ones you can most easily
because
get
it's like
into shit with.
I mean, it's this is a weird parallel to draw. It's a lot like BDSM where there's aftercare, you know.
I was like, is he going to say it?
Trust.
He did.
Yeah. It's a lot like BDSM where there's aftercare and trust involved. And like, if you trust your partner, you can go to darker places and come back from that because you know everybody involved is not actually upset. In the same way as a roleplay scene, you can go to darker places with people that you trust in a safe environment you know aren't going to betray your trust because you know you'll come back from there and that they will be with you afterwards and take care of you.
It wasn't too dark.
But
that's
disclaimer, do not take any of our BDSM advice.
Yes. Only our
My ace ass is not the place to go for BDSM advice.
The term ace ass is great though.
Yeah, I regretted using ass there.
As I was saying before, like giving yourself opportunity, not if you write a whole Tolstoy novel's worth of backstory, you end up locking yourself in and missing opportunities. Like in that game, Tipsy, who is our friend Scout's character, hi Scout, feeling responsible for the death of some children. Did not kill the children, but dark tragic backstory was not able to save them, and as such feels this debt that is slowly being repaid by this weird kind of ritualistic thing that their character does. But suffice it to say, our two characters are somewhat close to one another, so I wanted to work that element into my character so we'd have something to bond over during the thing. So in a moment, I gave my character a tragic backstory. He's not, he can't remember anything, not because he's drunk. He specifically did something to give himself amnesia so he won't remember the people he failed.
Sure.
And that's all coming out in the story. So,
very, very meaty, very classic.
Yeah, right. And it's just give yourself the opportunity to grow with the rest of your party by leaving blanks. Because if you don't, then you're just always going to play into the things that you're like, well, this is their history. I have to be beholden to it. The less history, the more free you are to create it on the fly.
I think also like creating like a Hobbiton kind of scenario where like you know where your character's from. If you're adventuring, you're probably not going to circle back to that necessarily. Like, I don't think there should be, again, any sort of like expectation that like you're gonna go.
It's my new book. I call it There.
But like, if it's the next town over and it's like the whole family of Oggs, Nanny Og, and all the Oggs, you know, that that's your family, like. I don't know. Is that fun for everybody?
My main thing would be if you give yourself a position of huge power and influence, I would be appreciative of that as a DM because it also gives you a lot to lose. And so it gives you a lot of stakes and a lot of investment into a location. So right now I'm running a Saturday game that is a city campaign, and it is completely focused around this one town. It's very high politics, very high like intrigue, court drama kind of stuff. There are a specific list of factions and they all have interplays. And you know, that would be a great place to have a character who wants to be the prince. But if you take on the mantle of, you know, he who wants to wear the crown must bear the crown, you are going to be immediately embroiled in high stakes shit if you're the prince. And so, you know, you're going to have assassins that will probably try and kill you at some point, or people who will try and manipulate you, people who will lie to you and try to use you. And like, you know, I'm okay with that if you're okay with that, but like, be prepared.
As a contrast, we've been visiting Opus's family in Arcadia, and I'm gonna make some sweeping assumptions. I assume Arcadia's kind of small town vibes.
Seal Gales is, yes, small town vibes for sure.
And so, but we've met Opus's, who's one of the characters' parents. And it's so interesting because they're actually like, they're communicating with Opus as an equal. They have come to be very crucial allies. And so I think that's really interesting because I'm guessing it sort of represents a change in like Opus's relationship to their family.
Yeah, for sure.
I could be wrong, but I think it's something like that, which is an opportunity to sort of see a difference from the relationship as it was. You know, this is a new relationship now.
Yeah, even Opus saying like, I can't believe my mom's so badass. Like, because like, you know, mom and dad never had to show the stuff that they learned while they were adventurers.
And, like the fact that the mom's like talking about like specific D&D mechanics, like, oh, you have these spell slots, like things that the character would know anyway because of what, you know, what they are. But like, giving that specific, I thought it was really smart of you, Jay, to give Opus's mother like sort of purview of the D&D rules because it made her seem very well versed in what she does, very professional, very...
Yeah, I wanted her to feel kind of like a powerful arcanist.
Yeah.
So someone who this is a woman that people would come to for help in like arcane matters.
I don't know if you'd be willing to tell me, and you don't have to.
Sure.
How fleshed out Opus's parents' like personalities were.
So Opus's backstory is pretty deep. It's got a lot of stuff about their siblings specifically. The parents were a little thinner on the ground at the time of creation, but so they were an area where I got to play around a little bit more. And I wanted to make Opus's parents, first of all, kind of a parody of Opus themselves. Just as a fun interplay. Like, we've been playing with Opus for months. Like, where does Opus get Opus from? Oh, well, obviously Opus's dad is a lot like Opus.
I think you did a really good job with that on it.
I've enjoyed playing Opus's parents. I've enjoyed having, and I also think it's funny to see Opus on this like different. Opus is the character who tries very hard, I think, to be authoritative, but fails kind of to come off that way a lot of the time, just because they're so gosh darn like goofy and awkward. And so I think it's really fun to have them, like foiled against people who are kind of more experienced and authoritative, and like, oh, maybe that's why they want to be that way. It's good. It's been fun. Having characters in your backstory that are important to your character helps give you investment in the world, but you shouldn't expect a reward for anything you put in your backstory. You shouldn't necessarily expect for everything to pay off. It's just going to depend on the way the story goes, and those things should be more to inform your role play than anything else. And if you have a bunch of backstory that's not in service of role play, then what is it doing there?
There's hooks that are very prescriptive, and then there's hooks with a little more wiggle room. Mm-hmm. So like what you just said, like you're getting into the sort of psyches of the parents, and you said like the siblings were more fleshed out. So I think it's easier as a GM to sort of jump into like the sort of the unknown, the less known areas of the backstory. So like leave some space. Like, who is the long-fingered person in black? Like,
sure.
There's some mystery there that the GM can leverage, but also like slip into. Like, I think it's much more appealing to like slip into the role of a cousin over a sibling that you have 3 pages about, right?
Yeah, God bless Ooze, who gave me a whole bunch of hooks in the character backstory, and I have just used the hell out of all of them. And Ooze is always like,
bad boy.
And Ooze is always like, this is all because I wrote a shitty 1-paragraph backstory. And I'm like, you're not being punished for writing a short backstory. You're being rewarded with character opportunity for leaving me a lot of space.
It's a reward, though.
Yeah, Ooze is having a great time. Ooze is the one player I'm not worried about having fun.
Gotcha. But is Tuck having fun, though?
No, that's a harder question to answer.
Yeah.
Lately, Tuck's had a few nice conversations with a goddess who is giving them a little hope in this world. So maybe it's turning around.
Gotcha.
And certainly as a GM, that's also something to keep in mind. Like, if a character is going through a really low period in their arc, toss them a bone. Like, help them get out of that. Like, it has to be peaks and valleys. It can't always be valleys. We can't all be Chris Perkins. All right, everybody, that was another episode of Insight Check. Thank you so much for joining us on another wild ride through advice. We hope that you have learned something about yourselves, about each other, about life, and more importantly, I guess, and more specifically, about tabletop role-playing games. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give us a review on iTunes, preferably with a large volume of stars involved, or whatever measurement mode of choice for your podcasting site.
It's not the size that counts, it's the volume.
Sure. And we want to thank Burnham at BERNUMMM, at Burnham on Twitter. They did our faces, and without them, we would not have faces, which would just be scary. We want to thank Vinsvept for our music, Never Stand Alone, which we use as our intro and outro. It's an incredible song, and you should check it out. They've just released a new album on Bandcamp for a game that they're helping to produce the music for. So check it out. It's great stuff. And as always, we're answering your cues.
From our collective A's, this
was
Insight
Check. We did it.
Let's end this episode.
Sounds good.
Hello. Nope. Goodbye.
Why?
Oh, it's the dive bomb check. It's the dive bomb check. Oh no, she's Dopplered off a cliff. No, Jerika.